She used to firmly believe that with enough hard work and perseverance, all good things would come: success, recognition, and happiness. However, after many setbacks and moments of exhaustion with no reward, she came to a harsh realization. No matter how hard you work, effort alone can't save you in a game where the rules were rigged from the very beginning, and where power doesn't belong to the most hardworking, but to those who know how to control the board. March in New York was still cold, with a light drizzle falling like a gentle reminder that winter hadn't truly let go yet. On the 23rd floor of a towering glass building in Midtown Manhattan, inside a rising tech company called NextPath, a young woman sat at her desk, fully immersed in lines of code and data analysis. Eliza Morgan, 27, was a strategy specialist in the product development department. No one in the office paid much attention to her, other than occasionally wondering why she was always the last person to turn off the lights and leave the building each night. Eliza wasn't the type of person made to shine in crowded meetings. She didn't enjoy small talk, wasn't skilled at debating, and had no interest in standing out. But she had one defining trait. When she believed in something, she pursued it with unwavering commitment. To her, work wasn't a place to showcase herself. It was a place to contribute to what she believed was right. And what she believed in now was a project called Nova Mind. The idea had come to her unexpectedly while reading a report about the rising depression rates among high school students in the U.S. It took her back to her childhood in a small town in Pennsylvania, where her father, once a steel mill worker, had struggled with depression for years after being laid off. In her neighborhood, no one talked about mental health as a serious issue. People just called it being sad, lazy, or weak. Her father slowly became quiet and withdrawn, isolating himself in a small room, living like a shadow in his own home. Eliza grew up with the sound of her mother's sighs, empty dinners, and a powerless feeling of not knowing how to help the man who had once been her hero. That experience quietly shaped her belief that if technology could help people connect faster and shop easier, then one day it should also be used to help people truly heal. In August 2018, Eliza began outlining the first ideas for Nova Mind. She wanted to build a platform that used artificial intelligence to help detect and intervene early in cases of depression and anxiety among high school students by analyzing facial expressions, vocal tone, and linguistic behavior during online interactions. She didn't have a team of her own. Eliza worked alone, gradually persuading engineers to help her for a few hours on weekends. In exchange, she would write their reports or assist with data analysis for their side projects. She submitted a preliminary proposal to her direct manager, Lori, a seasoned, tough-minded woman with a fair heart. Lori wasn't one to speak much, but she saw something in Eliza's eyes that stood out. It wasn't just ambition. It was a rare kind of conviction, like she was doing this for something greater than herself. Lori agreed to let Eliza continue developing the concept as an internal project. What followed was a stretch of sleepless nights, frozen screens during simulations, tense discussions with the programming team, and quick lunches taken in between pages of research. But Eliza never complained. She had something most people in that office didn't, a real reason to keep going, no matter how exhausting it got. By the end of the year, Nova Mind had begun to take real shape. A working prototype demonstrated that the system could analyze videos submitted by students to assess their emotions and mental state. Based on the analysis, it could suggest gentle interventions, such as conversation prompts, or recommend that the student seek guidance from a mental health professional, if necessary. The accuracy rate reached 84%, an impressive figure for an unofficial project developed by a single person on virtually no budget. Lori encouraged Eliza to present Nova Mind to the senior leadership team, and that was the first time Thomas Creed entered the story. Thomas was a senior product director, a powerful figure with significant influence over the company's strategic development decisions. He was known for his sharp intellect, polished demeanor, and a presentation style that was second to none. When he saw Nova Mind, he immediately recognized its potential, not just as a technological innovation, but as a political opportunity to strengthen his position in an increasingly competitive internal landscape. He appeared genuinely interested, frequently stopping by Eliza's desk with questions that made it seem like he truly wanted to help. Once, he invited her to lunch at a well-known Italian restaurant just below the building. Under the soft lighting and over a glass of red wine, Thomas spoke in a calm, persuasive voice. "You're sitting on a gold mine, Eliza. I want to help you bring it into the light. Take it where it deserves to be." Eliza, idealistic and driven by purpose, believed him. She handed over everything: original documents, presentation slides, research reports. In her mind, if the project succeeded, it was a shared victory. She didn't need the spotlight. She only wanted Nova Mind come to life, to help the people who needed it most. But after that lunch, the atmosphere at the company began to shift. In meetings where Thomas was present, Nova Mind gradually became referred to as the new strategic product initiative, with no mention of her name. In internal report summaries where she had once been listed as project lead, she was now merely labeled technical support. Lori noticed a change, but only said quietly, "Sometimes the quietest ones are the easiest to swallow whole. Stay sharp, Eliza." Still, Eliza chose to believe in the good. She didn't want to assume the worst of anyone. She thought that, eventually, people would understand, that her work would be recognized, that results, in the end, would speak for themselves. The night before the big presentation to the executive board, she wrote a message to her mother. "Tomorrow I'll be presenting Nova Mind, the project I poured my heart into for nearly a year. I think this could be the moment of my life." What she didn't know was that tomorrow would be the day she lost everything. She had spent an entire year preparing for that morning, but it only took 30 minutes for everything to fall apart. That morning, Eliza woke up at 5 a.m. The sky over New York was still shrouded in mist, and the soft golden glow of the streetlights slipped through her sheer curtains like quiet ribbons of hope. She brewed a cup of coffee and got dressed. A crisp white shirt, gray slacks, and her dark charcoal blazer. The outfit that made her feel the most confident, from a wardrobe that was otherwise modest and practical. She stepped out of her small Brooklyn apartment, boarded the subway, carrying her laptop and a printed backup of her presentation slides, just in case. A gentle symphony played in her earbuds, but her heart pounded like war drums. Because today, she wasn't just presenting a project. She was telling a story. Her story, her father's, and the story of children forgotten in an increasingly noisy yet emotionally distant world. When she arrived at the company building, she ran into Thomas in the elevator lobby. He wore a light gray suit, a deep red tie, his hair neatly slicked back. The smile on his face was the same as always, polite, composed, but this time it felt just a little forced. He looked at her and said, "Eliza, go on up ahead. I'll meet you in the conference room." She didn't overthink it. She truly believed today was about collaboration, not competition. The large conference room on the 25th floor was already full. Executives, strategic investors, and members of the product development team filled the seats. Eliza spotted Lori sitting quietly in the back row. Their eyes met, and Lori gave her a small nod, a silent gesture of encouragement. Eliza clutched her presentation folder tightly, mentally prepared for every possible question, every doubt, every technical contingency. She was ready, completely ready. Then Thomas stepped onto the stage. There was no introduction, no mention of her name, no invitation to join him to co-present. He plugged in his USB drive, launched the presentation, and the title slide appeared. Nova Mind, AI-based student mental health support system. Presented by Thomas Creed, Director of Product. For the first few seconds, Eliza didn't understand what was happening. She assumed maybe this was just a shared opening. Maybe he was covering the intro due to some technical setup. But then he kept going, confidently, fluently, using her words, her data, the research she had spent sleepless nights compiling. The demo visuals were the same ones she had worked on with the engineers, frame by frame. Everything, every slide, every explanation. Each sentence he spoke carried the unmistakable echo of her year-long effort. At one point, his eyes swept past hers, sitting among the mid-row seats. He didn't flinch. There was no trace of guilt, no hesitation, just a calm, calculated gaze, as if what he was doing made perfect sense. A single question echoed in Eliza's mind. Why? When the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause. Questions flew about scalability, integration potential. Thomas answered them with the ease of someone who appeared to have lived and breathed the project from day one. The leadership nodded, impressed. The CFO even smiled and said, "I didn't know you had something this strong up your sleeve, Thomas." Eliza sat frozen. It felt as if she had just been torn out of her own life story. The meeting ended. People began filing out, exchanging handshakes and praise. No one looked her way. No one asked if she was okay. Lori approached, placed a gentle hand on her arm, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't think he'd go this far." "What should I do?" Eliza asked, voice trembling, her eyes stinging. "I don't know," Lori replied, honestly, "but you can't go up against him here. Not alone." Eliza walked out of the conference room like someone who had dropped her heart somewhere along the polished floor. Back at her desk, she opened her email. There was nothing from the company, but there was a message from Thomas. "The project was a success. I knew you'd be proud. And of course, I'll make sure you're credited in the full report." She didn't reply. That night, Eliza went home, closed the door behind her, and cried. For the first time in years, she cried like a child. Not because she had lost the project, but because a piece of her trust had been shattered. She had believed that fairness existed, that hard work would be rewarded, that people wouldn't dare take what wasn't theirs simply because they had power. But the truth was far simpler. Those with power have a voice, and those with only conviction are crushed under the weight of the system. The weeks that followed were a slow, painful descent. Eliza still came into the office, but no one called her into meetings. Novamind was now officially a flagship strategic project of the product department, led by Thomas. Internal emails praised him as a visionary leader. The slides she had written were edited, her name removed, every trace of her involvement erased. She moved through the halls like a ghost, as if she had never existed. Lori was quietly reassigned to an unrelated department. She never said it aloud, but Eliza knew it was the price of speaking up. In places ruled by power, justice becomes a luxury, and sometimes a dangerous one. In May, Eliza submitted her resignation. No one asked why. No one tried to stop her. On her last day, she stood at the base of the building, looking up at the window on the 25th floor, where everything had begun and where it had all ended. Then she turned away without saying a word. For the next year, she lived like a shadow. She moved back to Brooklyn, took on freelance work, picking up small contracts just to get by. She no longer spoke about Novamind. She told no one what had happened. What remained inside her was just an emptiness, cold, quiet, and heavy. Sometimes she asked herself, was the mistake trusting the wrong person? Or had she been wrong all along to believe in something as fragile as ideals? Friends offered comfort. Her family worried. But no one truly understood what it felt like to build something from your very soul, only to watch someone else wear like a trophy while you were pushed to the margins, erased, as if you had never existed. One winter evening, while sorting through old documents, Eliza stumbled upon her original sketch of Nova Mind. Scribbled notes, red ink annotations, the first lines of code she had written during a rainy night. She stared at them for a long time, and for the first time in months, something flickered inside her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't vengeance. It was a spark, the desire to try again. But this time, she wouldn't let anyone take it from her. She didn't know where she would begin, but she knew that something in her had changed forever. Not the girl who once believed kindness alone could protect itself, but a woman who had tasted injustice and would never let it happen again. And so, from the depths of her wounds, Eliza began a new journey. Slow, solitary, but unshakably determined, because she knew there was still something worth living for and worth fighting for. Sometimes, you don't truly start living until you've lost everything you thought was yours. Winter in New York is unforgiving. The long, barren streets, the wind lashing at passers-by like stinging slaps of ice. Eliza was living in a small third-floor apartment in Brooklyn. No balcony, no central heating. Each time the seasonal wind swept through the cracks in the window frame, she had to wrap herself in blankets up to her neck just to fall asleep. After leaving Next Path, Eliza no longer set alarms. She no longer woke up with a sense of urgency. Her eating habits were erratic, some days skipping meals entirely, other days surviving on bread and water. She no longer took care of herself the way she used to. She came to understand intimately how people live when there's nothing left to move toward. In the first days after betrayal, Eliza locked herself in her room. She avoided sunlight, friends, even calls from her mother. Once, her mother had texted, "You don't have to be strong. Just let me know you're still there." Eliza read it but didn't respond, because she didn't know what to say. No one had ever taught her how to grieve a kind of loss that had no funeral, no condolences, only silence and forgetting. Her mind remained haunted by the image of that conference room. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas standing at the front, presenting as though he had poured his soul into every line of code, every data point. She had thought she'd be angry, but the anger never came, only a dull, persistent ache, like an invisible wound that didn't bleed but throbbed through every hour, every day. Eliza began keeping a journal. Not to write literature, but because it was the only thing keeping her from slipping into the void. She wrote about the pain of betrayal, the feeling of being invisible after years of doing the right thing, the hollow ache of knowing you were right, but not having the power to speak it. Slowly, each page became a way for her to breathe, a way to stand back up, even without a grand reason. One February afternoon, with a light snowfall drifting through the air, Eliza stepped outside for the first time in nearly a week. She went to a small cafe and tucked herself into a quiet corner, bringing her laptop, not to work, but simply to type a few lines, anything to keep herself from sinking further. She didn't expect that, on that very day, an email would arrive. The subject line read, Nova Mind Project. Information from Jenna. Jenna was a former colleague at Next Path. They had never been close, but Eliza remembered her as someone who always observed quietly from the sidelines. In the email, Jenna wrote, "I know what happened to you was wrong. I saved some documents, including original files, email exchanges, and a recording from the first internal meeting. I didn't speak up when everything unfolded. Maybe because I was scared. But now, I think at the very least, you deserve to have back what's rightfully yours. I've attached everything I collected. I hope this helps you find some justice. If you need anything else, I'm here." Eliza read the message over and over. She didn't know exactly what she felt: shock, gratitude, sadness, or something between. Maybe all of it at once. She hadn't expected anyone to take her side anymore, But that one quiet gesture from Jenna cracked open something inside her that had been frozen for months. She played the recording. There was her own voice presenting Nova Mind in that very first meeting, explaining the logic, the purpose behind each feature. Lori backing her up. And then Thomas's voice cutting in. This idea will need more experienced leadership. I believe I can help. For the first time in many months, Eliza no longer felt alone, no longer forgotten. Over the next 2 weeks, she began gathering every document she had ever created. She dug through her old journals, reanalyzed the system architecture for Nova Mind, rewrote unfinished segments, fixed lingering bugs. This time, she wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone. She was doing it for herself, to honor the memory of her father, who had once lived like a shadow, to show the world that truth might be distorted, but it never disappears. She spent all of March researching small investment funds, startups in the mental health tech space, and nonprofit organizations looking for school-based AI solutions. She was no longer the naive girl who believed ideas were enough. She started studying contracts, intellectual property rights, and venture capital. She trained herself like a warrior, someone who had once fallen hard and had no intention of losing again. At the end of April, she received an invitation from a young startup in San Francisco, a team of engineers aiming to build an AI platform to support students in public schools. They had heard about her through Jenna. Eliza flew to San Francisco on a short trip. No luxury hotel, no first-class ticket, just her and her old laptop. Inside it, the full archive of Nova Mind. Only now it had a new name, Mind Flare. She met the founding team in a modest meeting room, a round table, paper cups of water. But what convinced her to say yes wasn't the setting. It was their eyes. They had the same look she once had at the beginning. The look of people who truly believed they could change even a small part of the world. She became a co-founder, responsible for strategy and product. No one fought for the spotlight. No one quietly swapped names on slides. They called her the heart of the project. For the next 2 years, Eliza lived in San Francisco and worked relentlessly. She didn't forget what had happened. But this time, the pain didn't drag her down. It pushed her forward. She set clear principles: transparency, fairness, and always credit those who contributed. Every line of code, every document, every meeting had an accountable name. She vowed that no one else would be erased the way she had been. When MindFlare launched its beta version, small schools began to pilot it. The early feedback was positive. Some students struggling with severe depression found a sense of companionship in the digital interactions. Many teachers called it the first emotional tool that actually made a difference. Eliza didn't need media praise. All she needed was an email from an elementary school teacher that read, "I think MindFlare helped us stop a student from taking their life last week." She closed her laptop, not crying, just sitting in silence. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. Not because she had won, but because she was no longer afraid to lose. Not all revenge begins with rage. Sometimes it starts with a deep silence and a plan built from intelligence. By the middle of the 3rd year since leaving NextPath, MindFlare was no longer a fledgling project. It had grown into a well-regarded mid-sized tech company, drawing attention from education and mental health institutions across the country. Schools in Oregon, Colorado, New Jersey, even the Los Angeles Unified School District, had begun pilot deployments. Eliza's creation, once stolen and buried, had become something real, something that saved lives. She never spoke to the press. She declined every interview that asked about the past. But that didn't mean the past was finished with her. One October afternoon, while working at the San Francisco office, she received an email from a tech journalist named Alicia Montero. It was short, direct, I'm working on a series about women in tech whose contributions were stolen. I came across MindFlare, and after comparing it to original Novamind materials, I know what happened. I have the recording from Jenna, the emails, and the IP documentation you registered 2 years ago. If you want to tell your story, this time I'll let you tell it your way. Eliza stared at the screen. Her heartbeat was slow, but heavy. This was what she once dreamed of, then forgot, then buried beneath the pride of someone who had been hurt too deeply. She no longer needed justice as a trophy, but something within her, quiet, unshaken, still wanted the truth to come to light. She agreed, but with one condition: no sensational headlines, no media shockwaves. She wanted a story told honestly, objectively, and with depth, not just to call out one man, but to reveal the same system that had, time and again, stepped on the quiet contributions of women who had built it. 3 weeks later, the article titled "The Theft of Novamind: How the System Distorted the Truth" was published on one of the largest tech platforms in the United States. There were no scathing accusations, no sensational language, but line by line, through carefully laid out facts, emails, timestamps, and internal recordings, it painted an undeniable picture. Thomas Creed had used his power to appropriate Eliza's work, force her out of the company, and claim the title of architect of Novamind, something he had never built. The article spread faster than Eliza expected. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments from experts, investors, educators, and those who had been silenced in similar ways. One person wrote, "Her story is my story. The only difference is I never had the chance to tell mine." A wave of public outrage directed at NextPath began to rise. The company was forced to respond, but it was too late. Thomas Creed found himself at the center of a firestorm. Several major investors pulled out. Partners demanded a full ethical review of the company's leadership. Not long after, NextPath announced an internal restructuring, which included the termination of Thomas Creed for violations of professional conduct. Eliza said nothing on social media, no celebratory posts, no interviews. She simply continued her daily work, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But one evening, after everyone else had left the office, she sat alone in a small meeting room. The lights were off, the glow of her laptop screen casting soft shadows across her face. She played the old recording one last time, this time not to relive the pain, but to say goodbye. She deleted the file. 1 year after the article, The Theft of Novamind, was published, Eliza Morgan stepped onto the main stage at the National EdTech Conference in Washington, D.C. It was an early summer morning, sunlight streaming through the massive glass windows, casting long beams across rows of packed seats. The air was unusually still as the name MindFlare lit up the giant LED screen behind her. Eliza wore a navy blazer, her expression calm, her eyes clear. She was no longer the woman who had once walked out of NextPath in silence, no longer the one who had lived in the shadows of disappointment and injustice. Today, she stood here not to retell the past, but to share the journey of rebuilding, a story born of quiet resolve, unyielding decency, and intelligence that refused to be buried. We started MindFlare with 3 old laptops, a shared workspace, and one question: can technology truly help people heal? Eliza began, her voice steady and warm. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on her. She spoke of the students who had found hope again, the teachers who rediscovered the power of emotional education, and the parents who had once felt lost but now had somewhere to begin again. MindFlare was now active in over 1,200 schools across the U.S. A major nonprofit had just signed a partnership to bring it to under-resourced communities. The state of Colorado was considering adopting the system as part of its school-based mental health initiative. Eliza closed her keynote with a small story. She shared a handwritten letter that had arrived at the office from a 10th grade student who had once been on the edge of suicide. In the letter, he wrote, "I don't know who you are, but Mind Flare made me feel like I wasn't invisible anymore. I think I might still be worth living for." As she stepped off stage, the audience rose in a standing ovation, but it wasn't loud or flashy. It was a sound of quiet acknowledgement, of deep respect for someone who had once fallen hard and refused to stay down. That night, Eliza returned to her small apartment in San Francisco, still living simply as she had from the beginning. She made a cup of tea, opened her laptop, and read the conference feedback. One email stood out. It was from her mother. "I watched your speech live stream. I'm so proud of you. And your father, if he were still alive, he would have been sitting front row today." Eliza smiled. She didn't cry. She didn't need to, because she understood now. Life isn't always fair, but we get to choose how we respond to it, with steadfast kindness and relentless effort. The end isn't where pain disappears. It's where pain no longer holds you back. And Eliza, after everything, had moved beyond it, not as a victim, but as the author of her own story. Eliza Morgan didn't need to stand on a stage to be recognized. All she needed was to stand tall after everything that had been taken from her. She didn't seek revenge through anger, but through the quiet power of success. She didn't tear anyone down with bitterness, but instead let the truth emerge, undeniable, unshakable. She walked through her pain, not forgetting it, but refusing to let it imprison her. And that was her greatest victory. Because justice doesn't always come from courtrooms, laws, or belated apologies. Sometimes it comes when someone who was knocked down finds the strength to rise, to move forward, and to turn their scars into action, to turn pain into a light that guides others. Not everyone will recover what was once stolen, but if you hold on to your belief in yourself and in the worth of doing what is right, then no power in the world can truly take that away. Eliza's story is a gentle yet unyielding reminder. Justice isn't something we wait for. It's something we create step by step through every action, every choice, every time we choose to rise. And if you, somewhere in this life, have ever felt forgotten, pushed aside, or robbed a part of yourself, remember this. You still have the right to continue. There's still a road to walk. There's still light to find. Thank you for listening to this story with your heart.